Hey guys, as always, it's me, Grestar, and in this video, as you can tell by the title, this is sort of where I'm going to be talking about the behind the scenes, so to speak, of my April Fool's Doki Doki Literature Club video. This is all post-production, obviously enough. I did not actually, record anything during the time where I was creating it, but I wanted to make this video for a couple reasons. So first, I wanted to make this to explain to those who are interested how I created the mod, essentially, of Doki Doki, and then how I created the video as a whole. Because, you know, the first step was to create the game that I would be playing, and then the second step involved actually all of the editing and stuff like that to make the final video. So for anyone who was curious as to how I did it, I figured this would be a good place, like as good a place as any to talk about it. Number two would be to promote the actual April Fool's video that I made, because I, at the time, tried to be really subtle about it. I wanted to release it at the usual time of day that I usually release videos, but unfortunately I was working until on the project for 2 weeks until the time where it was finally uploaded. It was ridiculous. And so I failed on that part to get it up at the normal looking time. I got it up at 7:30 p.m. or something, April Fool's evening. So that was a little unfortunate for me, but you know, I did what I could. But I titled it Doki Doki Literature Club Part 8, and I actually had removed, I made the original Part 8 in my series unlisted, and I put the April Fool's video in its spot in the playlist and everything, and I feel like a number of people saw that it was Part 8, thought that I was already done with the series, or they clicked on the video and saw that it seemed familiar, and so they left. And so for the people who did that, I want to say that, no, please go back and watch it. It's not... I was just being sneaky is the issue. But now that April Fool's is long past and subtlety is out the window for the sake of a joke, you know. Subtlety for the sake of a joke, rather. I wanna compensate by being more promoting of the videos. So, yeah. And then number three, I kind of want to just have this video as a record for myself and for anyone else, again, who's interested. But, you know, to kind of talk about my experience with the project, you know, the things that I had to do, how I did them, the issues that I encountered, the workarounds, you know, that sort of thing, the mistakes I made as well. But, yeah. So, as I said, I worked on that project for about 2 weeks to create the mod and then the video itself and do all the editing and rendering and all the creation of it and everything. And so... I usually don't work that hard, so if you haven't watched the video, I would highly recommend that you do, and I would ask that you do, just because, again, I put a lot of work into it, and it is different. It was an April Fool's video, of course, but I tried to make it entertaining too. You know, I wanted to give people something that they could still watch and enjoy, but that was a joke, that was fake, kind of thing. So... Yes, also if you're going to keep watching this will spoil everything, this video. So you should really watch that April Fool's video first, and then come back and watch this one, and then you can hear about all the little things that I did to make that happen. So, yeah, okay. And this is unscripted, by the way, so I'm just going to go for it. So, let's go. So I guess first things first, how the idea kind of happened. Some of you may have noticed that in the descriptions of my actual Doki Doki Literature Club videos, from the point where Sayori hangs herself, I act in the description as though nothing out of the ordinary happened. And so I act as though they went to the festival anyway, that they had a great time. And then in the descriptions too, following along those lines, I introduced a character named Evan into the story. Again, just all in the descriptions of part 8 through part 12, I think is where I ended the series. But yeah, if you check those descriptions, they're still the same. I haven't modified them. They're still all about, going to the festival and meeting Evan, and Evan, being competition and stuff like that. Just because I thought that it was humorous for myself, where, again, you know, Doki Doki Literature Club took such a sudden kind of psychological horror turn, where it suddenly was not a normal visual novel kind of dating simulator sort of thing. It was a much different game, you know? And so in my description, I just thought it'd be amusing if I pretended it hadn't had that twist, you know? So that's how that happened. And then April Fool's was coming around the corner, you know? It's just one of those things that I had never done, and every year I'd kind of felt bad about never doing anything with April Fool's. And so this time I thought, you know, hey, wouldn't it be fun if I could actually create the game with Evan in it kind of thing? And then I realized, I went into my Steam library and I went to the software section, and it turns out I had Tyranno Builder Visual Novel Studio, which I must have picked up when it was on sale at some point. You know, now and then I pick up little things like that, like, you know, RPG Maker, because I always want to do more. I want to create, but I have such like a bad work ethic and like low motivation, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and so it's really hard to like get started on something and then to just not quit when it gets hard, kind of thing. But yeah, I'd never done an April Fool's thing. I saw that I had that software. I'm like, this is promising. And so I opened it up and I just went on, they have basically a tutorial project. So they run you through like how to add and exit characters from a scene, how to change their expressions, how to change the music, the background, how to switch scenes. You know, they have just the basic stuff for how to build your own visual novel in that software. And so, you know, I went through that tutorial, and once I was done with it, I thought, you know, like, this is actually possible. Like, I might actually be able to pull something like this off. It'll be hard, but I wanted to try. So because, yeah, I'd never done any other April Fool's thing in the past, and I had the means, I felt, to do an April Fool's thing, I really didn't want to let myself down this time. So I worked really hard, and, you know, I just decided, let's do it. So I did it. So after deciding that it was indeed a possible thing and that I did want to really pursue it. Also, I'm not listening to anything right now. Sometimes when I'm recording, it's just comfortable to have headphones on. Now you know. Anyway, once I realized that it was a possible thing, something that I could actually feasibly do, I went onto like the Doki Doki Literature Club wiki. They have a fan wiki, or maybe it's an official, I don't know, but either way, if you go to the character pages, you know, Natsuki, Yuri, Sayori, Monika, they have their own gallery with their own like sprites and everything. So you can find their sprites, their special pictures, and then if you go to the gallery in other places, you know, you could get the class background, the club background or whatever, the lecture hall, or you know what I mean, the hallway, that kind of stuff. Corridor, I think it's called. But, you know, you could find all of the backgrounds and all of the sprites. Actually, not all of the sprites. Actually, the one with, like, Natsuki, like, folding her arms and pouting kind of thing, I had to find that on Google, and then I only found one instance of it, so I had to change her expression, and that's actually why, if you watch the video, she doesn't use that pose for the vast majority of my project, because for a while I didn't have it, and I actually thought like, oh, I must have just imagined that sprite being a thing. But yeah, I got all the sprites for those characters from the Doki, or pretty much all the sprites, like I said, from the Doki Doki Literature Club wiki, and then I just swapped around expressions or whatnot as I needed. But yeah, once I got all of the assets, and I, you know, put them into Tyranno Builder, and then I had to make my own. So when I was trying first to think about what Evan actually looked like, you know, one of those things where you have a vague idea in your mind, but you can't actually like fully express it. But that vague idea led me to kind of two different anime characters whom I based him off of, and that's Ryota from Goku Goku no Brynhilder, like the main protagonist of that one, and then Hideyoshi from Tokyo Ghoul. Those two characters were the basic inspiration for Evan's appearance. Now, do they look at all similar? Maybe not. Like, the hair color is especially from, like, Ryota. But aside from that, I don't know, you'd be the judge. But those were the two that I looked at. Like, I opened up multiple tabs with different pictures of them, you know, in different poses and everything. And those were kind of my inspiration for Evan's basic appearance. Then, oh, I'll just take this now. I just had this little notebook right here. And it's like, it's blank. There's nothing in it anymore. Oh, except for like, if you want to look at an angry pizza kind of thing. I doodled one day with my brother. Anyway, I just pulled out a few of these pieces of paper and I created like, I'm not an artist by any means, but I tried to create a base head and like shoulders, a bust, I guess, sort of thing. And then I traced it and I copied it multiple times and I tried multiple different hairstyles until I found one that I liked. And I actually ended up picking the very first hairstyle I tried, but I think I drew a total of 4. And I wish that I still had those, but I left them on my desk and then food stuff happened and they kind of got ruined. I'll try to put on the screen a picture that I sent to my friend. I sent a picture of it to my friend over Discord, and so that is like, it's that kind of thing, but then there were 3 other different hairstyles too that I was considering, but I ended up on the first one anyway. I settled on that, so it worked out okay. And then Let me see, actually. Okay, so after getting like the basic bust and the hairstyle and everything that I wanted down, then I looked into the kind of outfit, and I figured that since it's based at school, I wanted it to be uniform-esque. But I didn't want to just copy up their uniforms, the girls' uniforms. So I looked up like Japanese uniforms and everything, for schools. And I saw that at least at some schools, the girls and boys had different like uniforms, different colors, Like all the boys wore the same thing and all the girls wore the same thing, but they weren't like the same between sexes. And so I opted, especially considering we would only see Evan in the club room, so like after school when things had calmed down, I decided not to make him wear a suit jacket, but I gave him, a button-up shirt and a tie and slacks, that kind of thing. And so I drew just like that shirt, so kind of like neck down to his like mid-thigh sort of thing. I drew that separately, and then again on like one of these small sheets of paper, which I still don't have. The same thing, that it got ruined with like grease and stuff. I don't know, it was gross. So just tossed them. But then I put both of those pictures basically on top of a bigger piece of paper, and I tried to sketch them together. And obviously the angle of the head I had to change. So yeah, but I ended up with this, and this is the first full picture of Evan. Here, I'll bring it up. Wow. There you go. Now you see it. That's the first full picture of Evan. Like I said, I'm not an artist by any means, so it's not great, but that's what I did. So there he is. Yeah. But you can see like the hair is a little bit different. The eyes are a little bit different. The tie I ended up making a lot longer because I was like, that's way too short, especially for a loosened tie. So I ended up changing that once I uploaded it. What I had to do, because I don't have a scanner, because I don't know, poor and stuff, I guess, is I just took a picture of it with my phone, sent that picture like to, I think I sent it to my brother on Discord or something, or maybe I emailed it to myself, I'm not entirely sure, but I just had to get it on my computer somehow, and then I put that onto GIMP, because that's all that I have. Or that's what I use for like editing my thumbnails and everything, so I'm at least somewhat familiar with it. I don't think it's a fantastic program for drawing, but I only needed basic stuff, I figured, so I did that. I don't have a tablet or anything either. But then yeah, so I transferred that picture to GIMP, and from there, I lined it, I just colored it, I just created the first basic sprite of Evan. I sent it to my brother. I had him, like tell me what he thought about it, what, he liked, what he didn't like, sort of thing. And I'm very sensitive to criticism as a person, which means that I really don't belong on YouTube, but hey, so, it wasn't easy for me to hear, but I sent it to him. Part of the reason I sent it to him was because I knew that something wasn't quite right. I just couldn't exactly pinpoint what. So, he pointed out like the mouth, the hair, the eye, like the coloring specifically for the hair. I actually don't think he pointed out anything about the eyes. It was mostly, I think, the mouth and the hair that he didn't quite like, and that I also didn't quite like. But, as I was doing this, as I was creating him, as I was, coloring him especially, I was trying my best to match the style of the Doki Doki characters. And there are no male characters in the game, so, I had to take some liberties, especially with just kind of like proportions. But I tried to match it because I probably should have said this earlier, but this project, my April Fool's project, it was never intended to fool or to trick anyone. It was meant to be, again, entertaining, I mean, like, if I could string people along for a while before they realized it, like, good for me, that means that I made it fairly legitimate looking. But the intention was never to be like, ha, I got you, it was just like, look, I did this, let's have fun with it, kind of thing. Let's just enjoy this new experience. So yeah, I did try to make it as legitimate looking again as possible, which was not easy for me, and I didn't do a perfect job, but some people at least thought that it was a mod not created by me. Like, I don't think very few people from the comments that I received seemed to think that this was by me. A number of people said that it was a mod, which is kind of true, but I don't think anyone really specified that it was by me. A few people whom I had told that I was like really busy working on something the past 2 weeks or whatever, they caught on to it. They're like, oh, you did the kind of thing. But the majority of people, I feel, didn't realize that I had actually made it. So that's another reason I'm creating this video, to explain it all. But yeah, that was how I created the first sprite of Evan. So after creating that initial sprite, and once I was satisfied with the coloring, with, again, that base sprite with the eyes, the mouth, everything, You know, and the thing I fixed with the hair was mostly just I added like some internal tufts and some shading and highlighting throughout a little bit more because it was relatively flat. And the girls, if you look at their hair, they actually have a lot of detail to it. Okay, the sprites in general, the Doki sprites have a lot of detail where sometimes, you know, the shading is just like, it's this color and then it's this color, you know, it's just a straight cut. Is that cell shading? I don't really know. And then other times it's like really smooth gradient kind of shading, and it's kind of in unpredictable places for me. And so I wasn't able to really get like, I wasn't able to blend that much of the styles to get like my style with theirs. I wasn't able to meet that, I don't feel, because it was really hard and I just did not have the time to do it. Again, I worked until like I finally got it uploaded 7:30, like April Fool's Day, 7:30 at night. So I didn't have the time to go that hardcore into the sprites, unfortunately. But even if I had the time, I don't know how long it would have taken to reach that point. Like I'm just, again, I'm not an artist. I tried my best, but yeah. But once I was satisfied with that sprite, you know, I changed up some expressions and I just exported them. You know, a lot of just different layers and, you know, hiding some, revealing others kind of thing using GIMP. And then I had to create the other sprites, you know, the other poses. Because looking at the girls, I figure they basically have 3 poses, 3 or 4, you know, that are fairly different, but somewhat, so, you know, like basic, but anyway, 3 or 4 different poses. And so I took pictures of myself, just one each, one doing, you know, this whole thing, and then one doing this through my like shaved head of hair, you know. And I don't know if I'll show those because I probably took them while I was just kind of like gross sitting in my pajamas in the dark because I didn't care. I wasn't planning on sharing them with anyone. We'll see how confident I feel. But it was basically just that, you know, a picture of me like this and a picture of me like this. And then I put those into GIMP too, just as their own layers. And I tried to use those as references to get those poses. So in some cases, like with the arm, I tried to just kind of straight up trace it. But then I had to, you know, mess with things because of proportions and stuff again. And so it was a little bit tedious. Oh, I should also add that the first picture, the very first full sprite of Evan, I believe took me 10 hours to do. So it's not great by any means. And then I think the next 2 poses each took about 5 hours because I didn't have to create him from the ground up. I just had to like kind of just half of his torso and head, because, you know, the heads both had different like angles to them. The arms were different in those different poses. But I think it still took me like 5 hours each, which is too much if you ask me. But I'm not a fast worker, I guess. So that took its time. And then again, you know, once I was satisfied with the pose and the coloring and everything, shading, highlighting, whatnot, then it was a matter of switching up the expressions. So that they were, you know, so I had a number of options. And then after doing those 3 basic poses, I decided I didn't have the time to work on a 4th one, nor did I really have a great idea of what that pose would be. Part of me really wanted to have like a finger gun one, but again, I just decided like, how often is he gonna finger gun people? And again, it just would have been a lot more work. Like that would have been one of the hardest sprite. I'd say the hardest sprite aside from the base sprite, just because the base was working from nothing. But I would have had to change like most things with what I had in mind for the finger gun sprite. So it would have taken forever, and I did not want to put myself through that. So I didn't. And so I instead just started working on the casual clothing. And I did wear this outfit specifically because this is what I based Evan's casual clothing outfit on. And I actually spent like way too much time on his casual outfit. I do like how it looks, for the record, but I spent way too much time on it, I think, for how little you got to see of it. Because again, there was that one scene where you got to see his casual outfit at the very end when you're at Monica's house, which hopefully I'll remember to talk about later. But all it is like he arrives, he says a few things, and then he goes over to the couch and he's gone. And it's like, well, I spent so long working on these sprites and you like didn't get to see any of it pretty much. So, oh well, it's unfortunate for me, but yeah, so once I got, again, the 3 basic sprites, then I did those same sprites, but in a casual outfit. So I just, you know, I again had to color over things, use different layers, delete stuff, change some. You know, like how in his school outfit, his sleeves are rolled up to his elbows, but in his casual outfit, I just had them all the way down. So I had to change things like that, like the ruffles and stuff, that sort of thing. But then finally, Evan's sprites were done. The only two that I had left after that to do were his stickers. And so I pulled up in GIMP all of the stickers for the other girls to get, kind of a reference for them. And then I started to make it. I believe that I used like, what was it? I think that I kind of traced a little bit Monica's head. She has hair, obviously, so I couldn't get it all perfectly. I didn't know exactly how it looked. But I think I tried to use Monica's head, Natsuki's, was it Natsuki's legs? Someone has legs that kind of just go down into that little, sort of like a sharp U or a rounded V, I suppose. And then obviously with like the splits in the middle. But I used that reference for Evan's legs. I used, was it Sayori? I think it's someone in their base pose has their arm out like that, and I feel like it might be Sayori, but I don't remember. But I used that for his kind of like, you picked me, yay, happy pose. He's just like, there's his arm, like, yeah, I did, kind of thing. And that's all I can think of. I mean, and then his other arm, I put it in his pocket because that was his base stance, so I thought his sticker should reflect that. The sticker thankfully didn't take too long to do. It took longer than I thought it would. I don't remember a specific time. But it didn't take too long because it was small. The details weren't excessive. There was still some shading, but it was pretty just like, again, I'll use cell shading, but I don't know if that's correct. But it was pretty straightforward. And then after that, it was fairly simple to get like the white border around him. And then once the stickers were done, they were done. So that's all of Evan's stuff. That's his, well, all of his sprites, at least, including the stickers. So from there, I was finally able to start moving on to actually creating the game. So when I was creating the, again, quote-unquote mod, I really didn't know where I was going with it. I was doing one of those, right by the seat of your pants kind of thing, where the only real structure that I had was, again, what I'd written in my descriptions of episodes like 8 through 12. And that was basically just that the festival happens, that a new kid joins because of it, and his name is Evan and everything, that the girls seem to like him, and I question whether he's competition or not, that I realized that he was flirting with me the whole time, and that we have a happy ending. Like, that was all that I had in mind. So every time I sat down to actually like write out the dialogue and, manipulate the sprites and everything, to see what was going to happen, what would work, what could lead to what. It was all just me improvising, basically, and working with whatever I created for myself beforehand. So it wasn't maybe the best method of attack, or whatever, but it was what I did. So to touch a little bit on Tyranno Builder, because that was obviously an essential part of this whole project, it is a pretty cool program, actually. I think that it's really nice. It obviously let me create what I created, minus a couple things that I worked in with editing. But what it is it's essentially a drag and drop program. I'll show some stuff on the screen, so you could at least see like what my project kind of looked like and everything. But the kind of thing where, oh, you want this character to enter? All right, well then you drag like character enter into this spot, and the things that are on the top of the list happen first, and it works its way down, just kind of like reading every action off, as a program kind of thing. And so then you'd have to deal with the sizing and the positioning and the expressions and everything like that. And yeah, but I think that it was really cool. It was fairly intuitive. There are some issues with it. There are some issues for sure. Like, I don't even remember what it's called, but if you go into like something on the top bar, and then you can bring up kind of an edit window. If the window is bigger or as big as your screen, so like at first I had the project be 1920 by 1080, but my monitors are also 1920 by 1080. It cuts off key things like the X button, so I could no longer get out of that without completely shutting down the software. So, things like that definitely should have changed. But I eventually changed the project to 1280 by 720 because I realized that that's what Doki Doki actually was. It only became 1920 by 1080 when I rendered them, so it would match my webcam resolution. But anyway, yeah. So starting the game, what I needed to do first, before actually putting in any characters, any dialogue, anything, was I needed to figure out how to make it look as much like Doki Doki Literature Club as I could. So obviously, like I said before, I had already taken the assets, so I had the character sprites, I had the backgrounds, I had the music, which I took the music from YouTube, I just copied it. I saved it as a .ogg, I think it is, because that's what Visual Novel Studio, or Tyrannobuilder Visual Novel Studio, yeah, that's what that uses. I assume that's what a lot of those programs use, OGG instead of like WAV or anything. And so I still needed to figure out kind of the template for it. So I ended up looking online. One of the first things that I felt I needed was to get the text box, you know, the box that appears whenever anyone's talking or when the main character's thinking, that sort of thing. So I looked online for one. I found one that was close enough to the original kind of thing. So I downloaded it, but I'll just put it on the screen what it was. It's just that, you know, it's transparent or translucent, I suppose, which is good because that's what I needed. You needed to be able to see a little bit of the background through it, but you know, it didn't have like the save, load, history, auto, skip kind of stuff at the bottom. It didn't have any of that, and it didn't have the name tag either. I had no idea how to put the name tag on, you know, like when people were talking. And so that was one of the things that I had to figure out. So yeah, I got that. I put it into the studio, and then you have to bloody position it. And it's super tedious, honestly, having to position it the way that you do. Because it doesn't really let you just easily kind of... So some things it lets you kind of drag into place and drop it there, like on the screen. Other things it won't. Or if it will, then it won't let you see the surrounding stuff, so you can't like coordinate in position to other things. So it took a lot of trial and error of just changing the X and Y values and the size too to get it to where I wanted it. But once I had it, there, it was done. That was it for the project, you know. But I wasn't quite satisfied with that picture that I'd used, again, because it didn't have any of the save, load, auto, skip, history kind of stuff. So what I ended up doing was I took a screenshot of the game, and then I put that into GIMP, and the thing that I was using, the text box I was using, into GIMP. And I basically went into, I zoomed in really far, and I traced around every letter of all of those words at the bottom, and I copied them and I pasted them onto that kind of like template text box. And it took a long time, and it still doesn't look perfect. Like if you look at it compared to like a normal screenshot from the game, you can tell that things look a little bit off. Like the coloration looks a little weird. The pixels are a little pixely kind of thing. But it was the closest that I could do. So once I had that, you know, I saved that text box as its own thing, and I put that into the software instead, you know, again, resized it, repositioned it, everything. And finally, we were good on that text box, at least, you know, that part. Then it took me quite a while, too, to get the proper font. You know, I had to Google, like, what font did Doki Doki Literature Club use? I had to download it. I had to figure out how to get it into the software. And then it took me a lot longer, too, because I just couldn't get it to match. Like, I was using the font, I was trying to have it, you know, be outlined in black the same way that Doki had it. I wanted it to look as bold, you know, like the letters as big and as separated, like as spaced out as, you know, they were in the game. And it took me forever before I was finally satisfied. And what I realized was the problem was that I was trying to compare it when it was in, you know, 1920 by 1080, when my project at the time was 1920 by 1080. But the game, again, is by default 1280 by 720. And so what I had to do, you know, once I changed my project back down to 1280 by 720, first I had to reposition everything. So all of the time I took to, you know, find the proper sizing and positioning of the text box, wasted. You know, I couldn't use those numbers anymore because I'd suddenly, you know, I shrunk the whole project down. So I had to change the text box size too. But once I did that, and, you know, I had to manually position, by the way, the text too. It doesn't automatically appear in that spot in the text box. Finally, the font actually looked correct, so I was able to move on from that. So the next step was trying to get the little flashing arrow icon that appears in the corner, because that's the icon that happens, you know, when you're waiting to like click to move on to the next text box. And that obviously didn't come with the static image that I had saved. Again, there was nothing at all in that corner. But I wanted it to be, again, as authentic as possible, so I wanted to find a way to include that. So what I ended up doing was I opened up the actual Doki Doki game, and I let it go to, you know, just a spot where someone's talking, and I recorded the entire screen for like 30 seconds, and then I Googled like MP4 to well, GIF, I guess, you know. I say that because I don't want people to argue about GIF versus GIF. I go back and forth with how I say it. Anyway, so I did that, and then what it lets you do, the site that I found at least, what it let you do was it let you crop out the video to what you wanted first. And so I selected, all right, just this bit. And so I made like a really small rectangle just around the pulsating triangle, you know? And so I had it, you know, convert that into a GIF. Again, I'm just saying that to avoid arguments, because I really don't want that to be what people are talking about in the comments. So once I had that, then I brought that into GIMP, you know, again, my editing program that I've been using, and I isolated the layers, and I deleted everything outside the layers, you know, because there was still like the pink from the text box that you could see. So I deleted all of that in each one. And then I actually had to go back through and refill the coloring in the triangle in each one, because considering it was like an animated thing that it then kind of converted on its way to GIMP into, you know, a picture after picture, you know, multiple layer thing, I had to go through and refill in the arrows so that they weren't looking constantly glitchy as it was pulsating. There was one other step. I think I had to rename every layer to have some sort of like dot something or parentheses stop or something like that. Because otherwise you could actually, instead of seeing the arrow animate, you could see each layer build on top of each other. So obviously I didn't want that. I don't remember again what I had to do, but basically in order to create the text box with, you know, the bottom stuff and the arrow, that alone took me about 4 hours before I was finally satisfied with everything. So it took me a long time just to get that to where I could be satisfied to like start making the game. But before I could do that and actually, you know, move on to the dialogue and stuff, I had to find a way to create the little name tag. So when people were talking, their name appeared and everything like that. And when the main character wasn't talking, but was just thinking, you know, that was gone. Or whenever there's any sort of narration sort of deal. So I found another image online that had a name tag. And so I basically just I resized it. So I opened it with the text box that I was using in GIMP. I resized it so it would match, and then I kind of just cut the tag off. Actually, no, I think I started doing that, but then I instead got a screenshot of the actual game for a more perfect reference, I think. But then the same thing, you know, resizing it, cutting the tag. And so I got it so it was just the tag, you know? So just the tag. And then I needed to get everyone's names. And so I took multiple screenshots using people's names. And I did the same thing where I would resize it so it matched the size of the text box and the name tag. And then I went through, again, each individual letter. I traced them all out. I cut them. I pasted them so they would fit like in the middle on the name tag to match up with what it was in the game. So again, that was very time consuming. But I at least had a solid reference. And what I ended up doing, a solid reference being like, you know, Monica already has a name tag from the game. So I had the size and positioning of her name down. I just had to reference it, you know. And in order to get Evan's name, I started a new game in Doki Doki where I had the main character be Evan. Same thing with Boy, actually. I started a new game with the main character being named Boy. And so then again, I just took screenshots and then, you know, edited out each individual letter and fit them onto a name tag. And then, you know, saved each name tag as, you know, like Evan's name tag, Riz's name tag, Boy's name tag, Monica's name tag kind of thing. And then what I found you could do in Visual Novel, or, you know, Tyranno Builder, the thing that I was using, was every time someone was talking, you could select a tag called Show Image, and you could select the image, and then it's just a matter of positioning the image to the correct spot. So every time I, you know, put in someone's name tag, so every time someone stopped or started talking, I had to, you know, do the show image or remove image, whether I wanted to show it or hide it, obviously enough, and then resize and reposition it so it was in the proper place above the text box. So finally, by that point, I'd gathered all of the actual Doki Doki Literature Club assets that I planned on using. I had created all of Evan's sprites and his stickers. And then I created, the name tag. I had the text at the bottom, the save load history stuff. I had the pulsating arrow for the next kind of animation. I had the name tag. I figured out how to do all that. I was finally ready to actually start the story. So then I had to decide where exactly in the story I wanted to begin. Because, I had, again, the basic structure of the festival's gonna happen, Evan shows up, da-da-da-da-da. But I wanted it to be, again, as, subtle as possible to kind of add to that authenticity, to make it, to add to the joke of the April Fool's project as a whole. So I looked through my videos to see where exactly I started and stopped certain things. Because I was thinking at first, I could have it's, main character walks into Sayoti's room, and instead of her hanging, she's just there and they have a chat kind of deal. But I had that part, where Riz goes into the room and finds her hanging. That was near the end of an episode. That was part 7. So I couldn't quite do that. So then I looked at the beginning of part 8. And I realized, oh, this actually could work out really well, because what I do first is I talk a little bit about what happened last time. I show people, actual files and how they were missing, like Sayoti's file was missing from the folder and everything. I talk about how I chose this option last time, to tell Sayoti she was my dearest friend and all that, and how I wanted to reload the game to choose the other option instead. So I went with that. I decided, all right, that's good enough. We're going with it. So for the process of creating the game, I just started it, as a black background. It faded into Sayoti's bedroom background, and then all the stuff that you can see there, well, Sayori standing there, and then, she and Riz have that conversation. But that's where, my project actually began. If you open up the project now, it'll just start at black and fade into the room, and right there, the conversation with Sayori. That's where my project actually starts. And so then, a matter of just the talking. Yeah, I feel like there's not a ton to say about this creation part itself than I already said, but I'll reiterate, I didn't have anything really planned aside from those few points I had. Festival happens, Evan joins, he's flirting with me kind of thing, happy ending. That's all that I had, really. That's all I had in mind. So everything that, Sayori said about the festival and stuff, I didn't know that that's where things were going to go necessarily. During that part, I did end up going back and looking up someone else who played the game just to see what would happen if you chose I love you, so that I knew what kind of dialogue was used. The festival being their first date kind of thing, stuff like that. But aside from that, I didn't look up, I didn't have to look up too much else's reference, that was, I think, all that I really looked up. But I did that, and then I just kept creating the game. And I just tried to let the dialogue and the scene progression kind of happen naturally. And I like to think that it did for the most part. Yeah. And so then, after that, you show up at school, there's that brief scene. And then this is where I tried to be, kind of a little bit clever with things where, I had Monica address everyone about, when the festival was about to begin, about how it was daunting because, we've never done this before and all that kind of thing. And that specifically, that we've never done this before, was sort of a play on how, in Doki Doki Literature Club, no matter what you do, you never actually reach the festival. That just never actually happens. And so I wanted to toy with that and have that be a thing that she says, I thought it was a little bit amusing. And then, you jump into the festival. I was by no means going to create an actual festival. I did not realize, I did not know what they had in mind for that, how those work over there, or anything. And so I just had it be black, and I figured that I would just kind of summarize it. But within the summary, I tried to have just two little Easter egg story. Well, not Easter egg necessarily, but that kind of thing. Well, first I kind of reasoned why Sayori didn't have to speak or didn't have to give her poem, because the last poem that we saw was her get out of my head poem, which you would not want to have to perform that. So instead I had Monica go and take her place, and where I thought I was kind of clever was no one else went twice. Just Monica. And I had that have its own text box and everything. No one mentioned it, though. No one mentioned the just Monica. I thought people would be all over that, honestly. because people were joking about just Monica from like the moment I started playing Doki Doki Literature Club on my channel. And you know, like working their own puns into it, or working just Monica rather into their own like comments and stuff like that. So I thought people were gonna catch on to that, and maybe they did. Maybe they just chose not to say anything about it. But that was one thing that I put in. And then putting in how maybe, you know, Yuri wasn't there, maybe she went off to make tea, and she very well could have, but there's also that just play of like, oh, well, when she gets excited, she might go off and cut herself kind of thing. Or, you know, like in the game, she's told us she was going to make tea, but instead went off and cut herself sort of deal. So I threw those two in. And then it was time to actually like go back to the scene, like the post-festival scene, have Evan show up. I changed Monica's eyes. I used Yuri's crazy eyes, if you couldn't tell. I just copied them both over, you know. I changed the coloring of them so they weren't purple, they were Monica's green kind of deal. And again, I had to swap out some expressions to fit what I needed. But the intention there was, you know, Monica was kind of freaking out because suddenly, not only did they actually move on in the day longer than she ever has before, actually going to the festival and everything, which, by the way, Monica, like, didn't get to experience because, like, you know, it wasn't an actual scene that happened or whatever, that sort of thing. If we're just going off of what I understand of the actual Doki Doki Literature Club game. But, you know, not only that, suddenly there's a new character. You know, all this time she's only known me and, you know, Yuri, Natsuki, and Sayori. But suddenly there's a new person actually entering Monica's life. And so, you know, I wanted her to be shocked by that and her world kind of fall apart because how she understood things to be, being like a video game character sort of thing, just some representation in a visual novel, you know, she wasn't supposed to experience new things like that. She never had before. And so I wanted her world to kind of fall apart internally. Not necessarily in a bad way, but yeah, you know, I wanted that sort of thing. And then with Evan and his dialogue, I did not expect him to have that sort of super awkward opening, you know, with complimenting Natsuki a little too strongly right when they met, to then having that awkward exchange with Yuri, and, you know, he was like, oh, Yuri doesn't want to talk. Like, hey, Riz, what are you into? Sort of thing, you know, I thought that, and then him, you know, because as he later told Riz, you know, he hated like upsetting or disappointing people. And for those of you, but yeah, I didn't plan on any of that being like super awkward, or I didn't plan for that to happen, rather. Again, it was all just improvised and it happened the way it happened, and I worked with it sort of thing. But you could actually see a lot of me in Evan if you look for it, with that thing again of like not liking upsetting or disappointing people, of being like self-conscious, but trying to be a nice, friendly person sort of thing, you know? I don't necessarily consider myself a puppy, like I referred to Evan, but he was, you know, he did have those traits in mind just because, like, that's how I feel about a lot of things and stuff like that. And actually, fun fact, if you haven't watched my Q&A videos, or if it's been forever, because it has, one of the questions that I was asked was, like, if I had to choose a different name for myself, and I don't think they meant username, I think they meant another name to, like, live by, what would it be? And it actually would be Evan, and that's the reason that I chose that name for him. It would be Evan, just because when I used to go to church, one of my teachers, when I like first moved to a new place, she called me Evan. I guess she misheard my name, but I didn't correct her, you know? So for like the next several months, I was Evan in that classroom. And I didn't mind it. I found it kind of amusing, like endearing in a way. Not that she was obviously giving me a pet name, because she genuinely thought my name was Evan. It's Dean, by the way. Not Evan, but Dean, for those of you who still didn't know my real name. And so I just let it happen. But yeah, since then, Evan has been my go-to name if I ever like needed another name necessarily or whatever. Not if I'm like naming a character in a video game, but it just in the hypothetical of like, if you ever had to change your name, it's always been Evan since then. So I named him Evan because of that. Yeah. All right, so the next creation thing that I had to do at that point, again, aside from just scenes, but like I said, it's all improvised, was the poems. So yes, I did write those poems as well. Battles was obviously based upon bottles. Like I opened up, well, for each character, I opened up the Doki Doki Literature Club wiki again, and I went to each character's poems, and I read over them all again a couple times, and I tried to get a feel for their character, their personality, and stuff like that, so that I could try to emulate it at least a little bit. Sayori's was an easier one in some regards because, like I said, I had the model from bottles, and then I just had to change it, and I wanted it to be still reminiscent like a proper sequel, but I wanted it to have a different like tone to it because Bottles obviously was very sad. Like it wasn't a positive poem by any means. And I wanted Battles to be the opposite, where she acknowledged that things were hard and painful, but she was willing and able to, push through and, start to pick up the pieces and move on with her life again. And then I hadn't planned on it being named Battles, but I named it after I actually finished writing the poem, and I just decided it was like too perfect not to pass up. Because again, just Bottles to Battles, I felt it was a really good connection between the two poems. The Natsuki poem was actually probably the easiest one for me to write because Natsuki, her poems are fairly simple. They have some sort of scheme to them, which I personally enjoy. I don't like free verse that much at all, really. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't understand the huge appeal of it, and I don't understand how to write it because I took like 2 different poetry courses over 2 semesters, so a whole year, and I never felt included. I always felt like an outcast in the class, in both classes, the advanced poetry class and like the beginner one, because everyone was just like, oh, this is super deep and meaningful and insightful, and I'm just like, no, it's garbled, it's condescending, it's whatever. Condescending I don't think that's right, but like haughty, like using big words or big ideas for the sake of it, like exaggerating the actual meaning behind this and everything like that. Just that kind of stuff. It's never been what I appreciated in poetry. I've always enjoyed the more gimmicky poems, the ones with proper like rhyming structures or whatever, things like that. Anyway, so Natsuki's was the easiest for me to write, I'd say. Where I wanted it to have a meaning, but it didn't have to be anything super complex. Like I wanted to have a meaning because she believed that they should have a meaning, but just the meaning shouldn't be hidden in all of these big words and stuff like that. So I created one about a werewolf. Like I wanted to involve animals because Natsuki likes animals. She likes cutesy things like that. And so it was just simple like, what kind of meaning could I try to get across? And the meaning was basically just that, that I had in mind at least, was Natsuki wishes sometimes that she were a better person or that she could do more, that she were capable of more, that people respected her or liked her more kind of thing. But at least it could be worse. Like that was kind of the meaning that I had from there. So that's why like, all of the animals, like the dog wishes to be independent, wishes it could be a wolf. The wolf wished to be stronger, wished it could be a werewolf. The werewolf wished to be normal, wished blood, meat. And then sometimes, like, I wish I were better. I wish it could be praised, but at least I'm not a werewolf. Something like that. I wrote these a while ago now, It's been, because I'm recording this, by the way, April 12th, in case that means anything to anyone. I guess that'll be my little log, because again, I'm making this partly for me too. But yeah, Natsuki's was just that. It was pretty simple. Yori's was that was a poem that I wrote for one of those poetry classes, actually. At the time, I had named it Pride. I don't remember the context of it. I don't think it was about me, because I'm not a prideful person, really. Like I said, I'm all self-conscious and stuff. Do I think I'm better than some people at some points? Absolutely. But, like I wouldn't say that my pride is a monster or anything like that. But I wrote that. I had named it Pride initially. And the whole thing was like, yeah, at first, it's small and it's something that you could be proud of, something that people won't mind and might think is cute and whatever. But then if it keeps growing, it can become unsightly kind of thing. And I figured that related a lot more to Yuri's passions than, Pride or whatever. So I just changed the title of it, but I thought that it made sense enough for her. It was written as a free-form thing, so I figured that matched her well enough. I mean, at least matched free verse. And it's like, I don't really write deep poems, and so I figured that was probably the best I could do, so I wasn't going to write a new one. I was just kind of going to recycle one that, again, I used for a college course at some point in my life. Monika's I wrote at the time, along with, Battles and Sometimes I Wish, Natsuki's. And that one, I didn't bother too terribly to try to match the free verse kind of thing, because as I had Monica justify was, it was about styles and changing styles and how it's really cool to find your own, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't at times, branch out and try someone else's or try something new. And considering the change that Monica was experiencing in her life, I thought that it was reasonable enough to say that she might try something else, Like the rules were kind of falling apart in her world, and so why not kind of compensate for that by putting some more rules in her poetry, Like she realized she was trapped before when she realized, she looked out and like, oh, I'm in a game, that's the real life or the real world out there. But her poetry was really free verse, and so I thought, well, it makes sense enough where if she's realizing, hey, maybe I'm not as trapped as I thought, that she might, kind of transfer some of that trapped feeling into the poem itself with the structure and whatnot. But I wanted her poem to basically be just, she thought the world was this way, she had been feeling like this, all lost and depressed and scared. But then suddenly this happened, and like, what do you do when that happens? What does it mean when suddenly, your life takes such a big change, when everything that you thought you knew is suddenly not that case, necessarily. So that's just the basic thing I wanted to get across. I had fun playing with I had fun playing with the words there, using like cast. That was my favorite use of it, and that's where I really started to try to, but I couldn't find as many great ways to do that afterward. But I tried it first with cast and then with left to try to have a different meaning of the word each time. Like, cast in a hole, cast in a roll, and cast in somebody's shadow, where each of those kind of has a different meaning. Like I said, it didn't work as well with left, but I still tried it. I wanted to keep up with the consistency of the structure, if nothing else. So that was her poem. Did I cover everyone's then? So that was Monica's, Yodi's, Natsuki Soeda's, yeah. And then Evan's. Evan's poem was another one that I wrote for one of my poetry classes. Actually, no, that one I wrote for my creative writing class. But for that creative writing class, we were doing like a little section on poetry. And so I made the poem, The Dynamic Duo. And yes, the poem was all about, like, it didn't really have a meaning. It was just intended to be entertaining. It was just intended to be funny. Where I thought it was amusing to set up a rhyming scheme so that people would start, mentally anticipating a rhyme. But then if you kept anticipating that rhyme, you were going to have some dirty images. But if you just read it straight through, there's nothing like dirty about it, kind of thing. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted that poem to be. And at the time, my teacher told me that I should revise it so that it had like a deeper psychological meaning about how Batman was traumatized by the death of his parents. Or, to actually like look deeper into the homosexual allegations between Batman and Robin. And I was just like, no, this is my creation. I wanted it to be nothing about that stuff. Like, this wasn't supposed to be about psychological trauma after seeing the death of your parents. This was supposed to be a purely, like, comical thing. Just using Batman and Robin. So, I turned that down. But that was the poem that I suggested. And again, because Evan has a lot of my traits, I figured, like, what better person to share something that I wanted to share before than him. So I'm glad that I finally got to put that out there. I did post it once on Facebook, but I don't think people understood. I got a couple like, nice job, Riz. But I don't think people understood the poem, like what I was trying to get across with it. I think they just thought, look, he's trying, So I wanted to finally share it, and I figured, yeah, if I didn't have to create a new poem with Evan and I wanted to share one that I was already proud of, like, what better time? So yeah, I'll go back to these in a little bit and touch on like how I visually represented the poems and everything like that. But right now I want to talk about the creative aspect of, just again, what I had to create, I guess, throughout this project. So moving on from the poems, or the creative decisions that I made. So the next day after the poem game, basically I wanted the main character to walk in and find Evan somehow being on like the good side of all the girls again, because last we saw, like he seemed to care about the impression that he made, but he seemed really nervous. But I wanted them to like him, and I think that they could. I think they were just kind of caught off guard, sort of thing. But I had Yuri express that she was interested in stuff like that, like to get to know him better, etc. So I wanted him to make a joke. And then I thought about like the TV tropes kind of thing, Orphaned Punchline, I think it's called, or whatever. I looked it up too, and you know, one of those things where the main character, whatever, will walk in, whoever has the perspective at the time, will walk in on a joke that's just ending. So you don't hear the build up or anything, you just hear the result, like the ending, and then the result of laughter or the awkward silence or whatever. And I wanted there to be laughter. So I figured, like, what kind of joke could I have in mind for Evan? You know, did I want something to be dirty, but that you couldn't exactly tell was dirty from just the punchline itself? Did I want this? Did I want that? Eventually, I actually settled on just a Zootopia reference, because for those of you who didn't know, Zootopia is my favorite movie at the moment. And I know that it's like a couple years old at this point, but it's still my favorite movie. I really love that movie. It's great. So I had that. It's a scene where like Judy's interrogating Nick, basically, trying to like keep him on her side. And yeah, she mentions, you know, she's talking about like his taxes and stuff like that. And she mentions, you know, the joke about how bunnies are good at multiplying. So it's funny, and it is a little bit dirty too, because bunny sex. But yeah, I wanted that to be a thing. And what I hadn't expected, again, this is where the improvisation comes in. So that was the only reason that I had that joke be used, just because I like Zootopia. I wanted there to be some reason for them to all be kind of like on his good side, or him to be on their good side rather. I wanted them to like him. I wanted him to be, you know, charming in his awkward puppy way kind of thing. And so I hadn't planned on this, but then it became a thing where they were asking him to keep going, and then instead he suggested a movie night. And that just ended up working perfectly for the ending, because I wanted a happy ending, but when I was initially thinking about the happy ending, I was just thinking like Evan would go over to Riz's house, they're hanging out in his room, they lock eyes, you know, whatever. Like, I didn't know exactly, but I thought it would just be a solo thing between the two of them. But then when I thought about the movie night, even when I first proposed the movie night in dialogue, you know, when I was writing that out, I hadn't really thought like, oh, this is going to be the ending, you know, but then it did hit me down the line. I'm like, this could be the perfect way to end it, because then we get to see everyone. And so, yeah, I had him joke about that, and then he proposed, you know, they asked him to keep telling them more. He's all like, better idea, movie night. I had that be, I was initially going to have it be like the next weekend kind of thing, or this coming weekend, but because I wanted it to be, you know, the end of my mod, and I didn't want to have to like time skip an entire week, I figured that I would just make it the next day and have them meet up that evening instead. So I only had to like program, you know, like write the dialogue and everything for one more day's worth, and I figured I could pull that off. Yes, but then that day, it was also time, because this was after, again, the poem game, it was time to have Evan's special scene, and I had not created his image yet, like his special images, and I was not sure what I was going to do. I figured I wanted something to do with music, because for some reason, like when I first pictured Evan, along with his usual school attire, you know, the loosened tie and everything, the rolled up sleeves, I pictured him with headphones around his neck. I never did end up drawing those on his base sprite, because again, it was just going to end up being too much work. And I figured it's casual enough like this, but that's how I pictured him. It's just like orange and black headphones around his neck. So when it came time for the special scene, I decided that I wanted it to be something to do with music and him like sharing his music or whatever. And so I looked up some more, you know, like picture references, because I can't draw. And I started working on it. I woke up at 9 that morning, which is early for me. Usually I stay up until like 4. So that was definitely early for me. And I just worked on it so that I was done by like 1 p.m., I think, with the full image of like drawing it and coloring it sort of thing. So then, you know, satisfied enough with the image. Again, they're not perfect. They definitely don't match the quality of like the special pictures for the other girls. But it was the best I could do under that time, and maybe the best I could do, period. So I went with it. I thought it was good enough. So I went with it. I had their scene. I wrote it all out, and then I decided why not insert another few little Easter eggish sort of things. So I put in some more music that I kind of listened to. You know, not, you know, some definitely more than others. Some were just at least groups that I knew of. But, you know, so I had, what was it, Running Knot, which is Slipknot, Toy Chest, which is Toy Box, mostly just for the Best Friend song. I like that song. What else did I put? adventure, I think, which was Journey. And then I think after that, it was just Our Tiny Pony, which is obviously a play on My Little Pony. And one of the things that, I found kind of interesting about like my music is that if you're listening to it on shuffle, yeah, you could have a Slipknot song come on, followed by a song from My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. It just like the tonal differences of that. It has happened while I'm in the car. Like I'm listening to one and it's all heavy and like screamy and everything. And then the next one is all happy friendship. And it's just that dynamic I found interesting. So I wanted to have that in his character, in his music, like his MP3 player as well. But then on top of that, changing it to Our Tiny Pony, I got to throw in, like, guess he's an OTP fan, which, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of, like, visual novels and shipping and stuff like that, so not exclusively visual novels, but shipping in general. OTP, I believe, stands for One True Pair or One True Pairing. And so I wanted, just that kind of thing between Riz, the main character, and Evan. Yeah, so I went with that. And then the next scene after that was basically, like, the next big creative thing, again, aside from just more improvised dialogue and stuff, was them meeting at... Oh, I guess I could jump back and say, too, actually. This was back during, like, sharing poems and everything like that. Which I guess happened... When did that happen? Did that happen after? That happened after the special scene. Well, whatever. I'm talking about it in this order, I guess. Yes, I did throw in things purposely about, like... Natsuki and Yuri being in the closet, because, like, one, it made sense for them to be there because that's where the manga was, and the closet, I mean, that's where the manga was for Natsuki, and that's where you see Yuri a lot in the, or at least there's a pretty outstanding moment with Yuri in the closet in, the actual Doki Doki Literature Club game. But obviously I also wanted it for the whole, like, lesbian thing, because I was totally shipping them for this project. And then I wanted Sayori to be cutesy about Monika and everything like that. And Monika, being there for Sayori and Sayori wanting to return the favor and that sort of thing. Yeah, and so then the time came to have the movie night, and so I wanted some sort of outside scene. I could not draw it myself, especially with the time I had, and so I looked up some more assets, like official things, because I didn't want to steal anyone else's stuff, But I figured since I was obviously already making like a parody of Doki Doki Literature Club, I wanted to have it be like I was okay with taking their stuff, their assets, using theirs. And so I looked on the Doki Doki Literature Club wiki, and one of the unused assets, like in the Easter eggs or whatever, was that outside scene that I had briefly show up. And so I just used that as being like the outside of Monika's place. And then going into Monika's place, I opened it up in GIMP, and I added a couch, and I put a TV on the wall and like a shadow behind the couch, and it doesn't look amazing, but I figured that it did what it needed to do. Oh, and then what did I do exactly? I Googled a picture of some sort of outside, and then I just put it on a layer behind Monika's bedroom because her windows are actually transparent, and so you could see the outside through them. And then I went through and I modified things, I changed the color using some, just built-in tools. And then I used like the spray brush and like changed the color of the bushes outside. Or I made them bushes, I think, instead of just like black blobs sort of dealing. Yeah, so that was what I did for that. And then, I used the end screen from, after you see Sayori hanging herself, because there are only 2 endings in that game as far as I'm aware. There's that one. I mean, you could say there are other ones, like if you delete Monika's character file right at the beginning, then you open it up and you see Sayori hanging, and then if you wait 10 minutes, there's a whole like, now everyone can be happy or something like that. But I just mean like, there's the end after Sayori hangs herself, and then there's the actual ending with like going through the credits and hearing Monika sing and all that. There's, I guess, technically the good ending too, where like if you went through everyone's routes and then went through the entire game, then you get like the thank you message instead. But anyway, so I just used that end screen. All right, I think those are all the big like creative decisions that I made. So time to move on then to the technical stuff. I mean, I guess I already talked about a lot of it with like the text box and stuff and getting the little animated arrow flashing kind of thing. But the positioning was quite a challenge too. So like I said, every time I had someone talk or I had to remove the name tag for, when like Riz would just have a thought or something like that, or when the text box itself was going away, I had to do show image, that person's name tag, and then I had to resize it, reposition it, and then, remove image when I needed it to be removed. And so I had to have like a notepad open with all of these different like X and Y coordinates and, you know, sizes and everything like that, so that I had quick reference. So if I needed this, cool, I just look over here. To the point where with a lot of things, I just had a stream of numbers sort of like memorized. I don't remember them now, but at the time, because I was using them so much, I could just kind of like put them in. I still had to manually change them, but I didn't have to bring up the notepad to see it, kind of thing. So let's just talk about the technical aspect of actually starting the project. So like I said, starting the project up, it was a black screen that faded into Sayoti's bedroom, and then she appeared and she hadn't hung herself and everything like that. Or hanged herself? I don't know. So I needed to find a way to like have a proper segue. So I figured that part 8 was the best choice because I talked about what I did. I talked about what I was going to do, you know, try the other option. Yeah. So normally at that point, like I did in my actual playthrough, if you click on a save file to load it, it'll say like the, you know, Sayori character file is missing or corrupted or whatever. I don't remember. And so it says it's restarting the game instead, or starting new game. Instead, what I had it do was I clicked on it, and then I had the screen glitch for a second, just kind of freeze for a second, and then immediately start up. Because I did do a test of like a save file and then a load file, you know, where it wouldn't be corrupted, where it actually would let you load in as it does until the hanging point. And it just kind of immediately throws you in there and starts playing the music and everything. And so what I hoped to achieve with the freeze was to make it not as obvious that my webcam was completely different, because again, the first like minute of my April Fool's Project video was actually the first real minute of part 8. Like I didn't recreate that. That was, you know, the real thing. But I tried to wear the same outfit that I'd worn during that part. I shaved to try to reach the same like beard length of that part. I tried my best to mimic it. It wasn't perfect. Like the lighting was a little off because it's hard to get perfect, you know, the same lighting. Because admittedly, some of my lighting comes from like the window, the time of day that it is. I just can't help that. I do have 2 lamps, but there's only so much that can regulate, so. Yeah, so I had it freeze for a moment because my thought was like, if you for a second lose sight of something and then that something changes, you might not immediately notice the change. So that's what I was going with. So I had it freeze, I had it load into the save file, which at that point was the legitimate game, because that's where you're making the decision with Sayori, whether, you know, dearest friend or, you know, I love you. And so I actually played through, I started a new game as Riz, you know, again, played through the game up until that point, saved it, at the same point, you know, where I'd saved it in my original playthrough, and then I just loaded it back up for the sake of this, and so I started recording it. But I was so nervous making that video, like actually sitting down and recording it, I was so nervous. And so you can actually see that I pause, you know? When that starts, I'm like hesitating, because what I often do when I'm starting a recording is I just kind of sit there and I gather myself for a minute, you know, I breathe, I get ready for whatever's, you know, coming up, for whatever I'm about to record, and then I start, you know, whenever I want to start. But because the music was already going, I figured, oh, I shouldn't wait too long, because I had already started the video, technically, you know, or that's how I wanted it to look, and so I wanted to just keep going, but I was nervous. I had that stage fright for a moment where I kind of froze up a little bit, and then I started talking. Yeah. And I might introduce little clips throughout this if I haven't already, just so you guys know, so you can see what I'm talking about, sort of as a before and after sort of thing, or as an explanation. So, yeah, that was the first kind of, not goof, but thing that I had to cover, thing that I had to try to cover up. The next thing that I had to try to cover up was, well, first actually, so, you know, the day goes on, the night passes, and it's where you go to school and you talk to Monica and you read the Get Out of My Head poem and everything, and then you run back to Sayori's house, right? Where you're gonna go in, and then eventually you'd see her hanging. But before you go into her house, you can actually watch my webcam as my eyes move to the side, and what I'm doing at that point is I'm actually muting the actual Doki Doki game, because at that point there is no sound until the thud of seeing Sayori hang herself. And I was afraid that if enough time passed, it would just automatically move on to the next like text thing. or that I would click one too many times and it would happen, and I didn't want that thud to happen, at least where, you know, like where you could hear it in the recording. So you can see my eyes shift off, and that's where I mute the Doki Doki Literature Club game. And then the next thing that I had to cover up, that I had to try to make smooth, was the transition. Because what there is there's that moment, you know, where you're going up the stairs to knock on Sayori's door and talk to her and everything. And then, you know, before I gently open the door or whatever, because I think that's where I had it stop. So what I had to do was, I was genuinely nervous, by the way. Again, genuinely, like, really nervous about recording this. And, you know, doing it right and hoping that you guys would enjoy it and everything. And so, you know, I had my nervous face and I was like holding it, like I think my cheeks were puffed up and stuff and everything. And I tried to hold that pose, but it did not work, because what I had to do was move my recording from the Doki game, the actual Doki Doki Literature Club game, to my project. So, you know, I froze, and then I like looked over to my other monitor, and I selected my other screen, which I had positioned so it would be like right behind Doki Doki Literature Club, but I still had to select it. So I made that big, and then, you know, then I started playing again. But again, you could see if you focus on like the webcam, that there's a shift. I had to do a crossfade sort of thing to try to smooth it out. But if you're looking for it, you can tell, kind of thing, you know, that sort of thing. But that was one of the bigger obstacles during the recording, because, you know, I sat down, you know, after creating the game, the dialogue, the scene transitions, the changing of expressions, the characters leaving and everything. Then I actually sat down and played through the game that I created, you know, to try to have a normal Let's Play experience as part of the April Fool's sort of joke. And so having that transition from the actual game to my project without messing up was one of the big things that I had to worry about. Yeah. I gently opened the door. There was no thud. By the way, this is kind of technical. I mean, like, I had to manipulate it all myself, so I guess, yeah. On top of having to do the show image, remove image every time someone is talking, if you're not having like a one-on-one with someone, did you realize that the people who are talking actually, like, their sprite grows? I hadn't realized that at first. It took quite a while, because every time someone talked, I had to use the move character option, I had to change their sizing and positioning, and then every time they were done talking, I had to revert it back, you know? Like, I had to move character again, drag and drop that into the timeline sort of thing, and change their positioning again so that they were, like, pulled back, and then you have to juggle that with the change expressions to try to make it appropriate. So oftentimes when I was going through scenes, I would kind of focus on one person at a time, expression-wise. Like, I tried to keep on top of the move character, because otherwise I would be afraid of forgetting it. But the change expressions, oftentimes I went through the scene as one character, changed all their expressions, and then went back through it for the other character, changed their expressions. Like, it usually bothered me when a character was talking and they had a sprite where their mouth was not open. There are times where I let it go, but a lot of times I either created my own sprites for them where they had an open mouth, or I just, you know, manipulated the dialogue or whatever in some way where they would have an open mouth, and then I tried to close it when they weren't talking, that sort of thing. Unnecessary, but it was just, I guess, something that bugged me. But yeah, the moving in and out, that took quite a while. And then it took me a while after that to realize that, yes, if you were having a one-on-one with someone, they didn't grow every time they spoke. So then I had to actually go back and change things in a few scenes so people didn't do that, you know, because I had written it, so then I had to go through and just delete some stuff. But that took some effort. Another thing that was dumb with Tyranno Builder was that if I were to try to stop the music and then have another bit of music start playing immediately afterward, it oftentimes would just cut out the music entirely. Like, I feel the stop music prompt that I put first would carry over to the second one and make it play just a little bit, but then end it. So I had to be careful about the spacing of the music. And I really had to be careful too, actually, when playing this, to not rapidly click through anything. I wasn't planning to, because, you know, I was planning on reading through stuff anyway. But being the imperfect programmer that I am, there were, like, if you rapidly click through some things, like, some music bits will mess up. I think that's really all it is, just music or like sound effects. But yeah, I had to be careful with that. So one of the first technical things that happened, I actually had to like re-render because of this, but I had to re-render for another reason too that actually wasn't my fault. So I'm giving myself a pass. But the first choice that you come upon is after the festival when Monica's like, "Don't you think we make a good team?" kind of thing, and it's like yes or eh. I don't remember the options that I made, but when I was okay. So first of all, I don't know how to program those buttons the same way. I made it so if you clicked a button, it would take you to the appropriate response. You know, it would carry on from there. But what I couldn't figure out how to do was have it so when you hovered your mouse over it, that it lit up or that it made sounds upon hovering over or clicking afterward. I actually think that I know how to make the sound for clicking on it, for selecting something, but I don't know how to make the button highlight, and I don't know how to make it make the little ding sound when you hover over it. So I actually had to do that in editing. Every time there was a choice, I had to edit my own button. Well, first I created all of the buttons myself, you know, bringing them up in GIMP, sizing them appropriately to match the actual buttons from the game, using the same font and everything from the game to create my own text. So I had my own options and everything like that. And then, yeah, for the buttons, I just took, well, for the buttons not highlighted and highlighted, I took screenshots and I used those. You know, I edited them out, and I used those with my own text overlays and everything. And so that took some work. But then, yeah, like while I was playing the game, you don't see the buttons highlight or anything. You can't even see my mouse. You just have, the only way that you know that I clicked on anything is because the scene starts to move on. So I just had to actually use those visual cues after recording during editing to properly, like, well, to fix that, you know, to again be as authentic as possible, to make it so the button would light up. Which again, since I didn't have the mouse recorded, I just had to guess or make up when I hovered my mouse over options. So everything you see there, not necessarily true, kind of thing. It was a challenge a little bit. It was fairly time consuming, but one of the ways that I messed up was since I straight up just recorded the game, which already had the buttons, like the normal non-highlighted buttons and everything, but I wanted them to be highlighted when my mouse hovered over it, I had to just create new layers in my editing software, not GIMP, but like my video editing software, and put that image in and resize it and position it appropriately. And the resizing and positioning actually took some time. So what I started to do to ease the load a little bit was I would just duplicate the layer, delete that, like delete the duplicate. But if you duplicate the layer, it'll also duplicate all the properties of that layer, including the sizing and positioning. So that's why I duplicated it. But then I would delete like the highlighted button choice because I needed a different image, you know? Unfortunately though, so like I duplicated the layers throughout all of the button choices. Every time one of them highlighted, it had its own layer kind of thing. But because the choices were like so far spread out, I forgot to start like to keep deleting all of the ones during that, you know, when Monica asked you that question. And so when I finally rendered my video, when I was finally done editing, I was watching back through it to make sure it was okay. And when I hovered over like the yes option for like, yes, we do make a great team kind of thing, suddenly like 8 different buttons appeared in various heights on the screen. And I was like, that's not what's supposed to happen. Like it looked like a glitch that would have happened in the actual Doki Doki Literature Club game. And I don't have a screenshot of this. I, you know, solved the problem. So unfortunately I can't show you guys what it looked like. I don't think. I'll check to see if I have any, if I like rendered it to show anyone, but I think I just fixed it. But it looks kind of like a glitch that you'd see in the actual Doki game. So it was pretty bad. But I had to re-render everything on top of that because when I rendered it, after, you know, so the video actually ended up being 1 hour and 40 minutes long. It was quite a long April Fool's project for me. Every half hour though, or like I guess actually from the first half hour, it just got super laggy. As in my voice no longer matched up. It was no longer in sync with the rest of the video. In the software, in the editing software, it was fine. But when I rendered it in the actual video, it was not. Again, it just kind of broke down after a half hour. And then if you click near the end, you could, it was way off. Like it just got gradually worse and worse. So what I ended up having to do was actually render each video in 15-minute chunks and then put those chunks together and then render that as a whole video, and then it was fine, but it took a lot longer. So that's actually what made it go up at 7:30 p.m. instead of at noon, because I had to re-render so many different things, like so many different times. It was a pain. But yeah, those buttons, that was one thing that I had to do in editing because I didn't know how to do it in programming, was to make it highlight and make the sound effects, where I just put those in manually. It was not what I had expected, but it's what I had to do. The next goof that I had, or I guess, yeah, the goof that I had actually during recording was kind of my fault, mostly not, I'm gonna say. So it's when I was talking to Evan, and I think that I was about to reassure him about something. I don't remember, but it was when I was talking to Evan in the corridor, the first day that he showed up, you know? I scrolled, I accidentally scrolled on my mouse wheel, you know, kind of thing. And that brought up the chat history, like the text history, the message history, whatever it's called. Unfortunately, though, it brought up the default one that Tyranno Builder provides, not like the Doki one. I didn't take the time to like program that in because I figured I would never do it. And I had actually gone into the hotkeys and disabled that hotkey. But here's what sucks. So, March 30th, an update came out for Tyranno Builder that changed some things, and it actually, like, I had to go back in. So again, it was March 30th. It was ridiculous how close I was cutting it at this point, you know? But I had to go back in and I had to, you know, put in the font again, the custom font that I was using. I had to change it. So normally there's a gear icon in the bottom right corner, and you click on that to access the menu. That's the default for Tyranno Builder software. And all that I did, like that button is actually still there in the game as I played it. If I clicked on the bottom right corner, it would have taken me to the menu, which again was not a Doki menu, just the default one. But I just replaced the cog image that they were using with a transparent box so that it looked like nothing. But yeah, they have it so if you use the scroll wheel, of all things, it brings up the message history. And I had deleted that, but because of their update, it like undid my deletion and I didn't think to check that. And so while I was playing the game, yeah, I accidentally scrolled and it brought that up, and I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, how do I fix this? What am I supposed to do? And so then I ended up, I just, you know, like went back to the game, you know, I scrolled back or whatever to get off the chat message window. And it's just like, sorry guys, I had to cough. Something came up, you know, kind of thing. Because to be fair, something did like make me cough earlier. Like I choked on water a little earlier. But, yeah, it was just like I had not planned for that in the slightest. I had no like smooth means of recovery. Because I was so nervous, I rambled on longer than I should have, kind of thing. But I hadn't planned for that in the slightest. So it was unfortunate, a little bit my fault, because again, I did the scroll wheel, and I didn't check to see that the hotkeys were redone or like still disabled as I had them. But mostly Tyranno Builder's fault for just like updating at the worst of times, you know? It was a bit painful. What could I really tell him? I feel I should also point out that when I actually like had finished the game and played through it myself to record it, that was on March 31st. So the day before April Fool's. That's how close I'd cut it. And not intentionally, again, I got the idea pretty late, and then I ended up working super hard. Like the first week, maybe not as much because I didn't anticipate it to be quite as much work to do this. But the second week, holy crap, I worked so, like, you know, going to bed at like 11, waking up at 8, and working on it just all day. Like that's what I did, kind of thing. You know, I canceled both of my streams that week so that I could just keep working on the project. So yeah, just so you guys have a little bit more insight on that. The next time that I goofed, and this was 100% my fault, was when we were sharing poems with people. And at one point, so I shared with Monica first because I was trying to maintain the same order that I did when I actually played Doki Doki Literature Club, you know? So I was trying to do, you know, Monica, Natsuki, Yuri, Sayori, and then Evan, just tack him on at the end. But for some reason, I kept thinking that my order was Monica, and then Yuri, and then Natsuki. And so I accidentally clicked on Yuri instead after Monica. And dumb me, being dumb, actually made it so clicking on the Yuri button would bring you to her section, even though I didn't have that prepared. So basically what I did, I had to follow that order of people. If I did not follow that order of people, then buttons would be gone. So like, you know, I selected Monica, and then it takes you through Monica's thing, and at the end of hers, it takes you straight to a scene where there are, you know, the other buttons, but Monica's button is gone. Since I planned on having Natsuki go after her and then Yuri, if I went straight to Yuri's poem, I could have read through hers and had the same dialogue and everything, but when I got back to the button selection, Natsuki's and Yuri's would both be gone, because in my mind, following the path I had set, Natsuki's poem would have already been read. So yeah, like a dummy, I selected Yuri's poem, and so I had to do the thing again where when it faded to black after, you know, saying goodbye to Monica, I froze my webcam for a minute, which basically just meant I took a screenshot of where my webcam was, and I fit it over my actual webcam, so I'm like sticking my tongue out a little bit or something, like licking my lips, you know, kind of thing. And then I had it resume to where I started up again during the recording of where I had fixed it, where I went back and I properly selected Natsuki's poem second, you know. But that was the moment where I done goofed. Who should I show my poem to next? Well, so yeah, I'll just stick with the same order, like I said. So we'll go Yuri. And I think that those were all of the mistakes that I made. And aside from like, at one point in the dialogue, I wrote "walai" instead of "while," which I had not caught until I was playing the game. And so I made fun of myself while recording, because that was dumb of me. But I think that's everything that I had to try to smooth over with a transition or anything like that. So let's talk about the poems. Let's get back to that now that we're here. Obviously enough, I could not figure out how to make it scroll. Like, the poems were too big for the paper. I already made the text smaller than I think they were in the actual game, but they were too big to fit on one sheet of paper. But I couldn't figure out how to do a scroll. By the way, Tyranno Builder actually offers the option to use scripts, but I don't know how to program, so I don't know how to do scripting or anything. So I just had to use their basic drag and drop stuff, which, to my knowledge, did not allow for a scroll feature. So instead, what I did was I used GIMP to make the poems, by the way. I brought up a blank piece of paper that I thought looked like what they were using. Well, that I think is what they were using, but I'm not sure. And then I just used, I selected the area that I wanted text to be in. I selected the font, the proper font for each girl, which I looked up on their wiki what their fonts were. I downloaded them, I installed them into GIMP, and then I just copied and pasted from Word document the poem that I had for them. Made the font correct, changed the sizing and everything. Yeah. But for the people whose poems were long enough, I had to find a way to make it so you could see the rest of the poem and click back and forth without having to use a scroll wheel. So I made a sort of like, where you could see a little bit of the other paper behind it. So if you click on that tab, it'll like shift them. And I made the paper ruffle sound every time you did. You know, I just included that, and I made it in a loop where you could click on that endlessly to switch back and forth. And that's basically how I got around it. You know, there's a clickable area option in Tyranno Builder, and so if you click it, it'll take you to like a specific label. And so I had the label set to be like, you know, Sayori's poem page 2 or whatever. And then that label at the end of that, if you clicked on the border of that page, it would be like Sayori's poem page 1. And so you could just loop it. And then if you click anywhere outside the poem, outside the paper, like in the actual game, it would move on to the next scene. But yeah, that was one thing that I had to figure out, and that took a bit of time. It took a bit of fiddling to get that right, but I think it worked out pretty well in the end. So again, there's the positioning of the text box, there's the creation of the text box and all of that stuff, flashing arrow, the name tag and everything, having to put the name tag in each time someone's speaking, having to remove it every time they're done, having to move them, like make their sprite bigger and reposition it every time they're talking, all that. Having to get their base positioning and size to begin with. Most of them are like 750 pixels by something else. But was it just 750? Would that make them too fat? I don't remember. I have it saved, but I'm not looking at it right now. I just saved it so that I would have it, because again, I worked hard on figuring out all the numbers and everything. But getting all that stuff, the poems, having to smooth over the transitions, I'm not thinking of anything else aside from what I was kind of saving for now, because it was the biggest issue that I had in editing. The poem game. I could not figure out how to program the poem game. I could not for the life of me figure it out. I didn't know how to, again, make it so the words would light up when you selected them. I did not know how I could possibly fit Evan's little sticker onto the screen, because, the three girls, their stickers cover like the entire second page, or the entire left page, and how to make them like bounce around and everything, how to make the number count up appropriately. It was ridiculous. I just didn't know how to do it. And so what I ended up doing was, I could not do it as a programming thing. I could not actually have it be part of the game, so I instead had to use editing magic. So it took me, I don't know how much for the whole thing, but just to get the sprites, the stickers, to bounce for that 2.5 minutes where I played the poem game, it took me a little over 3 hours just to make the stickers bounce. It took me longer than that to make like the entire thing. But here, I'm going to show you really quick a clip of like what you saw, a little bit of it, and then I want to show you a clip of what I actually saw while recording. So here, you're going to have the after and then the before. So there you go. Okay, look, yeah, Evan has a sticker. Evan has a sticker. I guess he's a potential date. You know what? Good for the game. Good for the game. Yeah, okay. Well, all I really know about him is that he's a playful puppy. That's how it seems. That's how he seems to me. I picture him as a puppy. So I guess like kind of Natsuki sorts of words? Like Natsuki or Sayori maybe? I don't know. Let's try. Okay. No. Okay, yeah. Okay, so it is kind of Natsuki or Sayori-esque, but I don't know what ones are like Natsuki or Sayori themselves. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's still guesswork, but okay, look, yeah, Evan has a sticker. Evan has a sticker. I guess he's a potential date. You know what? Good for the game. Good for the game. Yeah, okay. Well, all I really know about him is that he's a playful puppy. That's how it seems. That's how he seems to me. I picture him as a puppy. So I guess like kind of Natsuki sorts of words? Like Natsuki or Sayori maybe? I don't know. Let's try. Okay. No. Okay, yeah. Okay, so it is kind of Natsuki or Sayori-esque, but I don't know what ones are like Natsuki or Sayori themselves. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's still guesswork, but we'll see. So basically, first what I had to do to actually create it for the final video was I had to take a blank notebook background, and I cut off everything but like the left page. So everything at the ribbon, everything left of the ribbon basically was that blank notebook page. The right side of the notebook page was me actually recording the Doki Doki Literature Club game. So I made a new game in Doki Doki Literature Club. I got to one of the poem games, I think the first one, and I started recording. I muted that game so that I could hear my clip of me picking the words during my recording of, my mod, so that, I could hear the words. And as I'm listening, I had to try to pick words that I think could be appropriate enough for Evan. What I did to ease it a little bit was, because I was listening to the clip in, my editing software anyway, I created a new tab, and every time I thought that I had selected something, I created a little text box, which was just, it was purely a placeholder, But every time, and so I needed 20 of the text boxes. Every time I saw a text box coming up, I knew that that was a point where I had selected a word. So I had to, while recording the game, I was listening to myself, trying to determine how the mouse should be moving, what words I should be selecting, when I should select them. I was trying to look at the text boxes, because if you listen to what I'm saying, I don't give a lot of hints as to when I'm clicking on things, Now and then, like I said, I think I clicked I gave a hint as to like the first two, but then I wasn't very clear after that until I was like 7, 8, you know, and so then it's like, oh, between then I apparently need 3 through 6 kind of thing. And if you listen to me playing the poem game in the final video, I never say what the word is. And that's because, again, I was staring at a blank page. I had no idea what the words were. And so I couldn't say any of them. So that's why I just had to give numbers and just be talking to try to fill the void, you know? So I just was talking over nonsense while pretending to click, where each time I clicked while recording, I mean, so I was clicking, but not on words. Each time I clicked while recording, it was progressing the countdown so that I knew this is how many times I had to click before the poem game would be done, and it would automatically move me on to the next scene. So yes, I took a blank page, a blank notebook page background, cropped the left side. I took the recording that I did of the actual Doki Doki game, poem game, and put that up behind it because I needed to cover up the actual bouncing stickers, you know, the Yori, Natsuki, and Sayori. I needed to cover them up. Then I took their stickers myself. I resized them so all 4 of them, you know, along with Evan's, could fit in that little spot. And then, yeah, I took the 3+ hours to just animate them bouncing around. It took me that long. It was so bad. It took me that long, yes. And then I had to, I put in the music myself because, like I said, when I was recording, both in my mod and in the actual Doki game, there was no music because I muted it. So I put in that, and then I had to put in the sound effect each time I selected a word. So I had to line that up with the placeholders, with when the word would change. Basically, I would move frame by frame, and when I saw that a word was starting to morph into another word, you know, which would mean I selected something, oh, and I did, by the way, I did go back and fine-tune it so it would be even more in sync with what I'm saying. The recording of the game, the actual game. But yeah, every time a word started to morph, I would put in the sound effect, and that's when I would have the character do their happy jump because I selected their word. I also went into the Doki Doki Literature Club wiki and looked up the poem game, and how that game works is that each word gives like a certain point value for a certain character. So like if it's Sayori's favorite word, she'll get 3. And then Natsuki will get 2, and then Yuri will get 1, most likely from that kind of thing, you know? And so you don't actually, I don't think you necessarily have to pick the like someone's word the most. You just have to make the total add up in their favor, that kind of thing. So every time it was a word that I decided not to have Evan jump for, I looked up who actually would jump for it, and I had them jump. And I got a lot closer to Yuri than I anticipated, but I did manage to get Evan with the most jumps, like by 1 or 2. And yeah, it took forever. I had to include like black backgrounds too, to make the fading look more natural, because otherwise how it would all fade out, because there were so many different parts, you know, there was the full Doki Doki Literature Club video that I recorded for the poem game, there was like that bit of the notebook, there were the character sprites behind it, there were the character sprites that I had put in, like all of these different things, so they would fade out at different speeds, and so I had to use like a couple different just layers of black to try to manipulate the fade out so it would be more consistent across the entire screen, across the entire video. But that was easily the hardest part to edit, and it took the most workaround just because, again, I couldn't figure out how to program it correctly, you know, to make my own game like that. So I just had to make it look like I did it, kind of thing. So it's definitely something that I'm proud of. There was, you know, a lot went into that part. Just having to manipulate so many things. But I'm glad, I'm happy with how it worked out. I can't think if there are any other things that I really want to talk about as far as the creative aspect or the technical aspect or anything goes. So, you know, there were, because it was a multi-stage thing, you know, first I had to create this stuff. Well, I had to visualize at least the basic kind of structure, the idea of what I wanted. Then I had to create everything, and then I had to record myself playing it, which took some trickery in and of itself at that point. Again, with having to like smooth things over or whatever. But I mean, I guess that goes more into the editing portion. The trickery with recording was again more when I switched like from the actual Doki Doki Literature Club game to my mod. But then, yeah, there was stuff in editing too, where I had to, you know, make the buttons highlighted, make the sound effects happen, make the entire poem game basically, because again, it was just that blank thing that you saw. and that was all the input I had. But in the end, I'm really happy with how it came out. I know that it's not perfect, but you know, I worked really hard on it, and again, I don't really do much as a person. You know, I'm really hard on myself for being so unaccomplished, and you know, in many ways, in many cases, at many times, I feel underappreciated too, for stuff that I do. But I did something, you know, and like that's not something that I could say every day about myself. But I set my mind to something and I actually did it, and it felt really good in the end. It was a ton of work. It was a ton of work for me, and it was super stressful, and I was panicking about how I was going to get it done on time. You know, I spent almost all day for that last week just on my computer, like at all times aside from meals and, you know, obviously bathroom and stuff. Just working on that. Like I didn't really play video games. I just worked. And so, you know, that's not like the same. I wouldn't want the same conditions necessarily, but because I had that deadline and because I really wanted to get something done for you guys for April Fools, you know, I was able to do it. And I think that it turned out pretty well. Like I impressed myself. There are mistakes. Absolutely. I pointed out several here, but yeah, I'm really glad that I was able to actually stick with it and create something that I could be proud of. And that is, again, another reason why I'm making this video, to promote that, because I want more people to see it. Like, as of now, people have viewed more and liked more all of the other Doki Doki videos than the one that I created. And I'm glad that people enjoy, you know, obviously the original game is better than my mod. Obviously it is. But, you know, for that game, I played a video game. And then I took some time to edit, to, you know, put my webcam up there, to create an ending and an exit with like fade in and out, and I had my intro. But that's it, you know? And then with my April Fool's project, weeks of time and effort and thought and care and stuff. And so, you know, I guess it's one of those moments, yeah, it's hard to see that work just, I guess, kind of go unnoticed. Like, I'm afraid that it's just going to be kind of forgotten in my list of uploads, you know? So that is another reason why I made this video, but I'm not trying to fish for compliments necessarily, by all means. But you know, it's just it was a kind of a hard realization that working hard doesn't necessarily mean you'll succeed, I suppose. And yes, this is deep, because again, this video is for me too. And so it did have its hard moments like that. You know, when I was finally done and I didn't get the feedback that I necessarily wanted, but I also don't want to forget how it felt, again, just to actually do it, just to actually like commit myself and sit down every day and work on it and finally have something, to the point where when I was making the final scene with, you know, like everyone's happy and everyone's coupled together, and you know, just I didn't intend for it to be an entirely gay thing, by the way. More power to it. That just wasn't what I had thought. You know, I just usually don't think like that, I suppose. But I did make it an entirely gay thing, so yay me. But when I was making that final scene, like I got emotional, honestly. I don't think necessarily because of the scene itself, like, oh, this is so touching, but like I did it, you know, I was done. And by that point, I still had hours of work ahead of me because I had to edit. And just record it too, but it was exhilarating in its own way. It was relieving, it was empowering, it was a lot of positive words. So, yeah, I guess I just don't want to forget the experience. And I hope that you guys appreciate the project more, or at all if you just skipped over before, you know, now that you've watched this video and everything. Because, yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's meaningful to me, so if I could share it with you guys and we could, you know, both enjoy that meaningfulness together, I guess that's what I want from YouTube in general. Just, I want to enjoy myself and for people to enjoy themselves with me. You know, I don't want people to tell me, like, how to play video games, or that I'm bad. I don't want people to tell me that I miss things. I just want people to enjoy themselves with me, to point out moments that they enjoyed, that, you know, that they thought were funny, that they thought were emotional, whatever. That's what I want from all this. So, yeah, okay. I guess that's the end of this video. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. If I did, I may try to record it and slip it in, but I'm planning on uploading this like tomorrow. Again, I'm recording this Thursday the 11th, or the 12th, sorry. And I'm planning on this going up Friday the 13th. Hey, April Fools and Friday the 13th. Why not? But yeah. If you guys did actually watch this video all the way through, I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So, yeah, trying not to get emotional here, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So, here. That's for you. So I think it's only fitting to have this video end the way that my project did. And actually the way that it ended, you know, without the background music, without the outro, was because I literally couldn't have any more tracks in my editing software, you know, audio or video. I used as many tracks as possible, but I still think that it's fitting here. So thank you guys again so much if you watch this, if you watched my project. I hope that you guys continue to enjoy my work for as long as I do it. And yeah, with that, we're calling it here.